Falo pra vocês que Pikachu não serve. Vamos lá pro SCP do Pikachu. SCP-5254 Gotakat em Al. É, velho. Do Dr. Bob. Deixar meu link aqui. E mandar um salve pro Delfos, mano. Delfos lá comentou no nosso vídeo lá. Mal sabe ele que o vídeo que eu detono ele ainda não foi pro ar, velho. Que é o da orquestra lá, velho. Eu inverti a ordem dos vídeos sem querer. Sei lá, eu fui pegando os vídeos que a gente tinha adiantado e fui botando lá e upando. Nem vi a ordem, não. Foda-se. Enfim. O Delfos, cara, que o cantor lá que o Bono indicou pra nós aí. Aí ele até comentou lá que era o Gazu, realmente. Ele até me mandou o canal novo do Gazu. Pra quem não conhece, deixa eu ver se tá aqui o comentário dele. Nossa senhora, é muita... O ruim de se inscrever em tanto canal assim é a notificação pra achar depois, né, velho? Aqui, ó. Nossa, na hora que eu já ia desistir. Esse aqui é o canal novo do Gazu. Pra quem quiser se inscrever lá no canal do Menino Gazu. O menino tá voltando a postar vídeo. Música nova. Tem uma de 8 dias atrás aqui, ó. Tem legenda, aparentemente. Vamos lá se inscrever no canal do Menino Gazu, velho. Depois que terminar esse SCP aqui, nós reage a uma musiquinha do Menino Gazu, velho. Vamos lá, vamos lá. Legenda tá ativada, eu já botei qualidade full. É isso aí, vambora.
A grisly incident occurs inside the popular storefront of Nintendo World at Rockefeller Center, New York. It happens during the announcement event of a brand new Pokémon game.
Aconteceu uma tragédia ao anunciar o novo jogo Pokémon. Scarlet Violet. Olha isso aí, ó. Trouxe o Pikachu do mal, velho. Eu falo com vocês que aquele jogo não presta, mas vocês não me escutam.
The highly anticipated sequel to the classic spin-off game Pokémon Conquest. Pokéfans from all over the world have shown up in order to show their love for the collectible monster franchise. But in the mere moments before the trailer could be shown, a rotten stench fills the air. A wafting cloud of poison gas sweeps low through the crowd, and the effects are immediately hazardous. A pair of young children in matching purple sweaters, marked with a distinctive symbol seen on a poison-type Pokémon, begin coughing and wheezing. These are not victims of the poison gas, but rather its inexplicable source. As the gas spreads through the store, the children begin to turn a bright shade of purple, and their skin becomes craggy and porous. Even more alarming is the fact that the siblings begin to fuse together, limbs retracting into their bodies as the larger of the two becomes little more than an enormous floating face, with the younger as an attached growth. The smog is so thick at this point that few are able to see that the two children now bear an uncanny resemblance to Pokémon number 110, Wheezing. The gas has been noticed by most of the adults in the room, and a panic has caused the crowd to begin trampling each other for the exit. In the midst of the confusion, several people step on the transmuted children, causing them to cry out in pain, and in a state of distress, they unleash the lethal Pokémon move known as Explosion. From the outside, a sudden blast can be seen roaring through the interior of the store. The windows shatter immediately, and a heavily damaged life-size statue of the Nintendo character Donkey Kong comes sailing out into the street, where it lands roughly in the midst of New York traffic. The NY...
Sabe o que é impressionante? Isso é muito pica, cara. Explode. E quem sai ferido é o Donkey Kong, né, velho? Quem se fode é o Donkey Kong. Uma franquia muito foda, esquecida pela Nintendo. Alô, Nintendo! Traz Donkey Kong pra nós, mano. Pô, o Donkey Kong era muito massa, velho.
Donkey Kong comes sailing out into the street, where it lands roughly in the midst of New York traffic. The NYPD are en route to Nintendo World immediately, expecting that some sort of bomb has gone off. There's no way they could have predicted what horrors awaited them at the scene. The unwilling Wheezing is not the only transformed human within the event, and indeed, some far more aggressive and dangerous monsters have been made there. A cosplayer in a onesie that had been designed to resemble Pokémon number 448, Lucario, has awakened her defensive sensory abilities on instinct to avoid the damage. But this protective power has come at the cost of her humanity. Blue fur erupts in tufts from her skin, and her face elongates into a distorted canine muzzle. Panic spreads across the morphing face of the cosplayer, and as she tries to get clear of the chaos, her flailing limbs send other members of the fleeing crowd flying. The genetic alteration that gave her limbs and face a Lucario-like appearance have apparently changed her muscles to deliver spring-loaded blows on instinct. Another fan finds that his hoodie, which features the face of Pokemon number 94, Gengar, had bound itself to him and caused his body to be partially insubstantial, as if it were made out of gas. He could barely control the direction his body traveled in as the wind pushed him out of the store. Several police cars arrive at Nintendo World and see the
Gengar, que é o melhor Pokémon de todos, né? Todo mundo concorda que é o Pokémon mais foda, né, velho? Não tem jeito.
Pokefan rising like a ghost above the streets. He has become like a human balloon, and there is no apparent way to get him down. One of the officers calls for a helicopter to arrive, and the rest proceed towards the source of the blast. Monster! Scream some of the fleeing survivors, pointing at the Lucario cosplayer. She raises her hands defensively, but this has the side effect of causing the bioluminescent cells that are now part of her paw hands to glow. The glare from this sudden reaction draws the guns of the cops, who aim for the cosplayer, unsure of what weapon she's carrying. "Stay where you are! Drop your weapon!" the officers shout. "Help me, please!" The Lucario cosplayer drops to her knees, reducing her threat level. From out of the smoke of the store come several more transmuted humans, most of them injured by the explosion. There was a three-legged being covered in pitch-black fur and sores weeping with yellow pus. Pokemon number 197, Umbreon, but its front leg was still a human arm. There was a bald blue man covered in a still-growing turtle shell, a human arm. There was a bald blue man covered in a still-growing turtle shell, a middle-aged Pokemon number 7, Squirtle. Smashing its way through the solid cement was a predator that was sleek in body, yet uncanny in movement. Pokemon number 445, Garchomp, a scaled humanoid monster that dragged its belly on the ground. The police were horrified as this legion of monsters crawled out into the street. Decades of media and conditioning led the cops to the only solution their currently broken minds could process. They opened fire with their firearms and screamed like babies at the scary creatures. Acting on instinct, the Lucario cosplayer moved at incredible speeds and dodged several bullets. She ran into a nearby alleyway and vanished from view. The other monsters were less lucky. Umbreon took a few bullets and dropped, while the Squirtle retreated into his shell as the bullets bounced off of the back of it. The Garchomp withstood a bit of weapons fire, but then burrowed into the street to escape. It soon found itself in a currently empty subway tunnel and made a mad dash for its escape from the authorities. Back above ground, the cops searched vigilantly for more of the creatures. As the helicopter sailed in, the floating Gengar drifted towards a tall building, phasing in through an open window. Once inside, the humanoid ghost Pokemon found itself much more comfortable in the shadows. The various employees of the office floor didn't feel the same, and were stricken with fear as they observed Pokemon number 94 turn invisible. His enlarged, grinning face...
Olha isso, o Gengar me lembra muito aquele gato lá da Alice, velho. Do País das Maravilhas, velho.
Disappearing, as if he were the Cheshire Cat from Alice in
Pô, o Gengar é muito maneiro, velho.
When firefighters started to mitigate damage at the scene, it became clear that at least 3 monsters were still on the loose. For now, the transformation instances were contained to the destroyed storefront of Nintendo World.
Já viu a Banete? Também é muito foda. Não vi isso aí, não. Pô, o SCP que transforma a gente no Goku, no Saitama, não tem, né, velho? Foda, transforma a gente no Ben 10.
Were contained to the destroyed storefront of Nintendo World in Rockefeller Center. But if affected individuals were contagious, then the situation could go from bad to worse at an alarming rate. The police established a perimeter and used their private radio to put out an alert to every officer in New York that there were apparently monsters walking the earth. Descriptions of the roaming Pokemon that were still at large were given, and this prompted a lengthy discussion over the radio about the logic of Pokemon existing in the real world. Several of the senior officers didn't have any knowledge of the Pokemon franchise and had significant difficulty being brought up to speed on the events of the day.
Pô, na moral, ninguém conheceu Pokémon é sacanagem, cara. Até pra quem é velho, tem que conhecer o Pokémon. Obrigatório conhecer Pokémon. Pokémon é antigo pra caralho, velho. Pokémon tava lá junto com Dragon Ball, Cavaleiro do Zodíaco. Pokémon é antigo, velho. Quem não conhece Pokémon, cara?
In communication, the extraordinary details of the case became known to every available officer. There were 3 suspects. Pokémon number 448, Lucario. Pokémon number 94, Gengar.
Tipo, eu sempre fui mais do Digimon, mas Digimon realmente é menos conhecido do que o Pokémon. Pokémon é grande pra caralho, velho.
With his invisibility and ghost-like material properties, Gengar had no difficulty hiding out in the office building. Though a brief look in one of the bathrooms showed him that invisibility was the best option for other reasons, as his face and body had deformed to the point that his head and torso had been fused together. Additionally, spined growths of cartilage had begun to line his back, and they were starting to itch terribly. His eyes had enlarged and were now completely bloodshot red with dilated pupils. It would be a miracle if anyone recognized him as a human being in the shape he was in. His mind could hardly cope with the change, and created a false narrative to spare his sanity.
I'm dead. That's it. I died from that explosion and turned into a ghost like Gengar.
It wasn't the most convincing or uplifting lie to believe, but it was enough to keep him from the risk of exposing his nightmarish form to other human beings. He became determined to haunt the office building as subtle as he could, until things made sense again, even if they never did. Gengar turned invisible again and faded into a non-existent presence within the building. He drifted unseen from workspace to workspace, unaware that his transformation was a curse that could be passed on. There were many office workers with Pokémon desk toys, and while the effects wouldn't be immediate, a dull ache began to set in across the office floors as bodies started to prepare themselves for transformation. Meanwhile, on the mean streets of New York, Lucario ran as fast as she could, quickly realizing that her muscles had become capable of great strides and leaps. She was able to scale brick walls and leap between rooftops like a trained parkour expert, and the exhilaration of such physical feats almost counterbalanced the sheer, mind-numbing terror of losing her original body to the Pokémon transformation. The sudden growth of a fuzzy tail from her lower spine jolted her back to the fear response, however, and in full panic mode, she refused to look at herself until she had successfully made it back to her apartment. The sounds of helicopters in the sky.
Pô, na moral, eu vou comprar um bonequinho do Pokémon porradeiro, meu irmão. Se eu for me transformar, eu quero me transformar naquele Pokémon porradeiro, é isso aí.
I convinced her to stay away from the rooftops and move through the side streets until she was back in her neighborhood. Along the way, a young girl who was walking with her mother recognized Lucario and pointed her out. Mommy, look, it's Lucario.
Imagina o cara que se transformar no Arceus aí. Pô, acabou, esse cara vai dominar o mundo.
The mother took one look at Lucario and screamed, prompting Lucario to run away from the family as rapidly as she could. She tried to deny what was happening, but also had the sense to not pass through the front desk area of her apartment building. For some reason, all she could think of was Spider-Man, and the many scenes from various movies in which Peter Parker or Miles Morales had to hide their powers and abilities. In a very Spider-Person-like move, Lucario climbed in through the window. She didn't even have time to ponder how easy it had been to break into her own apartment before she took full stock of her situation. The transmutation into Lucario persisted and had even absorbed her onesie into her biomass while removing its synthetic properties. The change was, to put it mildly, less aesthetically seamless than she hoped. Her mouth was somewhere between a wolf muzzle and human lips and looked completely mangled from most angles. The blue tufts of fur that were Lucario's trademark were patchy and didn't fully cover her body. The bioluminescence that had alarmed the cops earlier was now randomly occurring on her body with no rhyme or reason. She had never considered herself part of that side of the Pokémon fandom, but even by their arcane yet discerning standards, her body had become hideous. Lucario wept, unable to imagine what she would do with herself. How would she tell her family, her friends, her boyfriend? Her life as a person was essentially over. And based on the attention the whole event had gotten from the police,
Boa
it was
noite,
most likely going to be followed by the law until her
Seria o
dying
Zubat,
days.
mano. O Zubat seria você, o Bona, vocês que gostam de
The third
morcego.
suspect, Garchomp, had been roaming through the subways and drawing
Esse
a bit
seria
of
como é que é? Gobat? Eu esqueci o nome agora do outro lá.
attention. His movement through the tunnels had caused a great deal of collateral damage as his claws rend the concrete and stone.
Pô, esse aí gostou de virar Pokémon, esse aí tá maluco, velho. Esse aí virou Pokémon e já virou Coringa. Já ficou maluco, ó. Esse aí virou Pokémon, primeira coisa que veio na cabeça dele. Agora ele tem um poder, eles vão dominar o mundo. É isso.
Garchomp scrambled to try and find a place to hide, but the platform had so many people that trying to get through them resulted in bloodshed. Garchomp's rough scales flensed the skin right off several passers-by, and his dorsal growths on his limbs were sharper than an iron blade. People started throwing things and shooting small arms at the monster, but Garchomp's skin was impervious to such weapons. Even the police bullets from earlier had been unable to pierce through the scales, but there was a cost to being bulletproof. The weight of the scales forced
uma das
Garchomp to
variantes
crawl
do
clumsily
Zubat lá,
along the
velho.
ground, only reinforcing its appearance of monstrosity in the eyes of the public. Garchomp could still feel the pain of the impacts, like hard slaps against his skin. He almost wanted to cry from the pain, but there were no tear ducts behind his eyes anymore. Somehow, at the same time, something snapped inside of Garchomp. He wanted the violence to stop, and no longer cared how it did. And so, the transformed human went into a violent rampage that didn't recede even when the cops arrived. During this violent massacre, Garchomp had dissociated from the situation and felt like he could see the Pokémon that his body had begun to imitate facing off against a horde of enemies. He came to picture the other people as wild Pokémon themselves, and from his out-of-body vantage point, he saw himself as a Pokémon trainer, commanding himself in monster-to-monster combat. Go, Garchomp! I choose you! You'll never lose to them! Mach Punch! Outrage!
Enlouqueceu agora mesmo, velho, de vez.
Outside of the subway, there were tanks and other heavy-duty weapons ready to engage if Pokémon number 445 came to the surface. But unfortunately, it seemed to remain underground and in the presence of civilians. The only options remaining were to filter poisonous gas into the subway to knock the creature out, but there was still too much risk of innocent casualties. Though the cops did take down Garchomp with a rocket launcher, the incident was highly public, and the destruction caused in the firefight was unprecedented and brutal. Both Gengar and Lucario learned about the incident themselves later that evening, and it only strengthened their resolve to stay hidden and avoid contact with the outside world. Over the next few days, an elaborate media cover-up managed to spin the incident as a bombing of Rockefeller Center, unrelated.
Pô, mas deve ser muito pique. Imagina você agora se tornando um Pokémon, né, velho? Você sabe o que você virou, né? Quer dizer, mas assim, a princípio, aos olhos das pessoas, você é um monstro, tá ligado? E aí?
To the Pokémon event or franchise. This was partially...
Você tem que conviver, que nem lá em Parasite que eu tô assistindo, velho. Você tem que conviver com o medo de do governo querer te capturar pra fazer testes em você, tá ligado? Porque eu não duvido nada. Pô, um humano ganhou poderes, se tornou uma aberração, virou um bicho esquisito. Cara, a vida já não é mais sua, meu irmão. É nossa, a gente vai querer te estudar, tá ligado? É, por aí.
Due to a certain powerful foundation, pulling strings to ensure that the publicity of this event would not be focused on the humanoid Pokémon. This shift in reporting was spurred along by the distribution of amnestic drugs throughout Manhattan. As for any blind spots, the biggest asset to the cover-up was that it happened in the Big Apple. Weirder things have and are assumed to have happened every day in the city that never sleeps. And the jaded mindset of the denizens meant that all the rumors would fade away in a short while. But the threat of Pokemonification still loomed throughout the world, wherever the merchandise was freely circulated. Thus, in the modern day, a new war on Pokemon, a colder and more secretive war, was being fought through espionage and decisive operations. Though it might be infeasible to imagine that all memorabilia and products of the Pokemon Company could be seized by the authorities, the SCP Foundation has assigned much of its resources to scanning the existing stock for a catalytic component that results in the baleful transformation. This irreversible condition has been given the item designation of SCP-5254, and is considered part of the Keter object class. Of the 34 instances of SCP-5254 transformation that occurred following the incident in New York, only Pokemon 94, Gengar, and Pokemon number 448, Lucario, seemed to survive the day. Those that were neutralized through violence were also not the norm, as the vast majority of victims of SCP-5254 lost their lives during the process of the transformation itself. It's not hard to imagine the more humanoid and relatively human-sized Pokemon were a better fit for the continued life of the victim, as those who were changed into creatures with non-human body plans fared far less well on average. Pokemon with an insect-like or serpentine form showed a particularly low rate of survival among SCP-5254 instances, and this was also true for Pokemon that were more abstract in nature, such as many Pokemon based on inanimate objects. The SCP Foundation's official containment procedures when it comes to SCP-5254 is to terminate all instances, not only because of the irreversible harm and life-threatening condition inflicted on the victims, but due to the contagious nature of the SCP. As long as there is at least one human transformed by the effects of SCP-5254, there is an increased risk of other victims to experience their own transformation events. The greater the clustering of SCP-5254 affected individuals, and the greater each individual's knowledge and affinity for the Pokemon franchise is, the more rapid the onset and severe the effects of the SCP-5254 transformation are. Extensive testing performed with D-Class personnel has also shown without a doubt that official apparel from the Pokemon Company is where the start of SCP-5254 begins, and that the vast catalog of collectible fictional creatures is narrowed down to single choice by whatever creature the individual most closely resembles at the time of the transformation. The effects are slightly diminished or delayed if the article of official Pokemon clothing depicts multiple creatures, but there's no guarantee that the individual won't experience a change in pigmentation of the skin or the growth of animalistic features in keeping with the most prominently displayed Pokemon. The lethality of the transformation varies, but the alterations happen on a cellular and genetic level. Autopsies of SCP-5254 instances have shown that organs and bones might be entirely replaced by foreign organic material. Because very little of the original victim's body remains after a transmutation event, the extreme anomalous science involved in the creation of SCP-5254 remains beyond the SCP Foundation's ability to remedy or combat, even through the most extensive reconstructive surgeries. There is still an ongoing search for a person of interest who is known by the internet handle Sir Viper, and believed to be the culprit behind SCP-5254. A chain of email correspondence between Sir Viper and the employees of the Pokemon Company have been archived from the Foundation, and it seems as though the Keter-class SCP was allowed to happen in an official capacity because the Pokemon Company provided Sir Viper with some official merchandise in exchange for the promise of Pokemon being brought to life. The stockholders seem to agree that a world where Pokemon were tangible, breathing beings was one where even greater profits could be achieved, but the human toll and the reality of the product was anything but what they expected. One detail of the fictional world building in the Pokemon video games that is often
imagina virar aquele Pokémon ovo, mas ele explicou ali que tem algumas espécies de Pokémon que não dá pra virar, a chance de sobrevivência é nula. Quer dizer, assim, é muito baixa, né, mas é muito difícil. Cara, mas ele não falou sobre Pokémons lendários ali, né, velho? Sei lá. Mas eu acho que vale pra isso também. Eu acho que dependendo desses Pokémon poderosos, assim, eu acho que não daria pra um humano se transformar, não. Acho que também a chance de sobrevivência ia ser muito baixa.
Themselves is the adjacency between human beings and Pokemon when both exist within the same world. Though humans possess the power to build civilizations and cultivate ideals, Pokemon are equally powerful in the natural and spiritual worlds. They occupy a parallel existence that brings a cyclical balance to the world. While conventional science could never create a Pokemon, and the real world's evolutionary ecosystem could never produce one, Sir Viper is most likely someone who realized that the key ingredient needed to manifest real-life Pokemon is humanity itself. His experiments into human transmutation are founded on a philosophical basis rather than a literal one, focused on the inherent connection between Pokemon and people. The world cannot have one without the other, and in Sir Viper's eyes, the human lives sacrificed to bring Pokemon from the fictional world into this one were merely a redundancy. A mad scientist with a special interest in Pokemon, a worldwide franchise with more robust...
Aí, ó, se fosse pra me virar Pokémon, ia virar num bicho assim, cara. Olha aí que loucura, velho.
...marketing arms than Pokemon number 68, Machamp.
Só espero que ali embaixo seja grande também.
...victims of transmutation who are still unwittingly spreading the anomaly. The SCP Foundation must endeavor to gain control of all three if it wishes to bring an end to SCP-5254.
Não sei como é que é esse bichinho,
Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon.
Pokémon. Porra, aí sim, hein? Caralho, eu ia sentar picado em todo mundo, velho. Caralho. Pô, 4 pernas ainda. Pô, ia ser muito foda. Magikarp é melhor. Meu ovo, Magikarp, velho. Gostei desse aqui, hein?
Anomaly. The SCP Foundation must endeavor to gain control of all three if it wishes to bring an end to SCP-5254. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-674. The exposition gun makes Nintendo real
Isso aí a gente
life.
já viu. Ele vai aparecer no Pokémon Mitologia. Magikarp dourado. Deixa eu ver ali esse Magikarp aí. Magikarp dourado. Pô, mas virar uma cobra, velho. Não vou virar uma cobra marinha, não, velho. Meu ovo. Quero Pokémon. Deixa eu ver aqui, velho. Pokémons humanoide. Existe esse Pokémon aqui? Eu vi que tem um peitinho ali, hein? Pô, imagina virar esse Pokémon aqui, velho. Aí, ó. Pokémon aqui ia ser o Jonathan, velho. Um palhaço. Pô, Pokémon porradeiro ia ser incrível, né, velho? Pô, pior que virar esse guaxininho aqui não ia ser ruim também, não, velho. Sendo humanoide ia ser do caralho. Eu só não queria ser o Mewtwo, mano. Rosinha embaixo. Cara, pior que tem outros Pokémon porradeiro, cara. Só que eu não lembro o nome agora, velho. Ué, ele não é um guaxinim, não? Cara, Pokémons... Pokémons bípedes. Ah, não, cara. Imagina alguém virar esse Pokémon aqui, velho. Aí ia ser pica, hein? Ratatá. Ratatatá. O cara virar um ratatatá. Pelo menos o cara vai ser aclamado pelo Playtals. Ratatatá. Cara, sei lá, velho. Virar um gorila assim também maluco. Também é interessante, hein? Pô, tem uma lista com todos os Pokémon. Vamos dar uma olhada aqui, ó. Lista todos os Pokémons. Vamos dar uma olhada na lista aí. Pokédex. Acho que esse site aqui. Vamos ver. Deve mostrar todos os Pokémon. Ah, mostra os Pokémon e suas variantes, né? Vou dar uma olhada aqui rápido aqui. Database. Pô, aí pode ser também. Vou dar uma olhada aqui. Nidoran. O Raichu é uma evolução do Pikachu, não, né? Sim? Não? É? Lai falou não. Discorra sobre Lai, por que não? Tem um Raichu de Alola também. É? Sabia não? Entendi. Vulpix. Pô, Vulpix me pegou, cara. Vulpix. Faz o Pix. Pokémon do Pix, cara. Vulpix. Aí é bom. Porra. Pô, imagina o cara virar esse sorvete aqui, cara. Pô, e o virar uma MILF, velho? E se o cara virar um MILF? Como é que pronuncia o nome do Pokémon aqui, cara? Tem uma versão do sorvete com cabelo. MILF seria bom. Miau. Não é MILF, cara. MILF. Oh. Ele vira o Persiano, né, velho? Príncipe da Pérsia. Maneiro. Psyduck. O Golduck. Esse aqui é o Void, velho. O Golduck. Não é gorducho. O Capitão Caverna. Pô, esse aqui, velho, esse sapo também não seria ruim não, tá? Alakazam. Ali é o Machamp, né, velho? Caralho, velho. Tem uma planta de Plants vs Zombie, velho. Pô, e pior que esse Geodude aqui, ó. Ia ser da hora pra mim também, velho. Já que eu não sou muito. Eu sou tipo um boxeador, velho. Não sou muito de usar as pernas, não, velho. Só que eu nem lembro de muitos nomes de Pokémon, mas eu sei quase todos de cabeça. É, Pokémon Ima. Gengar. Pô, o Gengar é maneiro, velho. Aqui, ó. Esse aqui é o. Sei lá, mano. Qualquer um do chat aí, velho. A Anta. A Pokébola. E o cara que virou um monte de ovo, mano. Eu usava esse no Fire Red, muito bom. Hitmonchamp é sem futuro, velho. É fêmea, porradeira. Aqui, esse aqui é o Jinx, esse aqui é o Pokémon Milf. Olha lá aí, aqui, ó. Taurus. O maluco vai virar omelete. Snorlax. Miau. Pichu. O que é o Pichu? É o filho do Pikachu? Não tem um chifre. Estou humano, não. Sátira, infelizmente. Vaporeon. Evolução antes do Pikachu. Então esse bicho vira o Pikachu? Caralho. Pô, esse aqui é um Pokémon desconfiado, velho. Vai falar assim, não. Tem como dar zoom? Tem. Esse aqui é um Pokémon desconfiado. Cadê? Pokémon desconfiado, velho. É esse aqui. Umbreon. E se o cara... Pô, o cara que virar esse Pokémon letra aqui, velho... O cara é pica, tá? O cara é o algoritmo, velho. O cara é Matrix. Precisa de outros, né? Então, os caras vai virando e vai se unindo aí, velho. Esse aqui é o Pokémon goleiro, é? Esse aqui então é você lá aí. É que você não é o boi, você é a vaca. É os bichinhos da natureza, né? Porra, é essa, mano? Pinto do. O papo do bicho, velho. Vai até na traseira, mano. Doideira. Gardevoir, psicofada. Essa aqui vai ser, se existir, se alguém virar esse Pokémon aqui, ia ser a mais procurada de todas. Cara, a pessoa que virar esse Pokémon aqui vai ser igual aquela cachorra quando vira a esquina assim, aí você fala lá uma cachorra, aí depois vem aqui um monte de cachorro atrás, tá ligado? Porra, safada, velho. Caralho, mais uns bichos que parecem o Pikachu, velho. Minun, Closely, sei lá. O que é imã? É positivo, negativo? É bateria. Bateria, né? Parece pilha, ou Pichu na forma pilha. Mais ou menos. Caralho, Pokémon espantalho. Porra, Lunatone. Foi Pokémon pra caralho, velho. Quero achar uns. Pô, virar isso aqui é sem futuro. Aqui já são os Pokémon lendários, né? Alguns, né? Nitorrinho. Pô, tô tentando achar alguns maneiros, velho. Mas tá foda. Pior que eu tô me sentindo um rei Pokémon, velho. Porque tem muito Pokémon aqui que eu conheço. Eu não lembro de ter assistido muito Pokémon, não. A forma básica do cara. Esse Pokémon aqui é eu, cara. Esse Pokémon, eu viraria fácil esse Pokémon aqui, velho. Ainda mais com a cara que eu tenho, que parece o Senhor Batata, tá ligado? Com o bigodão, o óculos e o narigão, tá ligado? Pô, eu viraria fácil isso daqui, cara. Puta merda. Lux, Mesprit, Zelf. Esse pós-react vai pro react do canal. Vou colocar lá também, mano. Se alguém quiser, não precisa ficar até aqui não. Pode meter o pé, velho. Aqui é só extra do vídeo, é isso aí. O vídeo já foi, já passou. Quem quiser conhecer todos os Pokémon, fica aí, ó. Passando por todos aqui, ó. Só vai pausando o vídeo aí, vai vendo. Ó, aqui começou os Pokémon porradeiro, hein? Mas esse Pokémon ainda tá sem futuro. Eu tenho que procurar o Pokémon definitivo que eu viraria, velho. O que é um Smash de Pokémon? Pokémon sorvete. Among Us. O Among Us sempre existiu, velho. Se pega ou passa. Puta merda, velho. Eu pegaria esse daqui, ó. O que eu faria com esse Pokémon aqui? Deixa em off. Não voltou até agora. O Daniel. Caralho, velho. Enel é foda, velho. Mais um Lai aqui. Aluguel aqui. RN é bem baratinho. Caralho, aqui são os Pokémon Deus, né, velho? Aqui certeza que eles são inspirados nos Zeus, esses bichos aí, sei lá. Ou no Mágico, no Gênio, né, velho? Zekrom, esse Zekrom eu achei maneiro também. Pokémon Espada? Caralho, Pokémon Mão Pata, sei lá. Outra variante do Pikachu, cara. O cara tem mais variante que o Covid. Dedenne. Caralho, velho. Uma árvore maluca. Olha o Zygarde, mano. O protetor aí da Terra, velho. Zygarde, né? Pô, esse Pokémon aqui também é legal, hein? Incineroar. Cavalo, aqui, ó. Mimikyu. Só queria ter alguém para o amar. Pô, isso me deu uma dica de react, velho. A bozolha aí, ó. Pô, e essa madame aqui, ó, feromosa, velho. É Shadow. Estaca-taca. Pokémon Palco. Porco, sei lá. Ulu. Vira uma torta de maçã, velho. Tá vendo? Até os Pokémon das outras séries é mais da hora que o Scarlet Violet, velho. Essa é a verdade. Pô, os fãs do Scarlet Violet vai me descer o pau, velho. Ela é basicamente uma barata, né? Feromosa. Aparece pernilongo. Olha essa boquinha que parece um bumbum, velho. Caralho. Pô, esse Pokémon parece figurinha do WhatsApp, cara. Aqui é uma cara, aqui é outra, e aqui é o desconfiado, velho. Os Amazenta e os Acia. Os... Isso daí a gente viu lá no vídeo. Pô, cara, esse Pokémon aqui me lembra muito um Alien de Ben 10, na moral, velho. Não tem jeito. O Zarude. Zarude! Ele me lembra muito um Alien de Ben 10. Aí eu aqui de novo. Aí eu aqui de novo. Não, não é macacaranha, não. Meus carada. Só tô olhando pras pernas do Pokémon só, desculpa aí. Pokémon azeitona. Esse Armarog também é maneiro de se virar. Aqui, umas bosta. Uma bosta. É isso aí, uma bosta. O Pokémon Martelo lá da guria. Acho que esses aqui é do novo Pokémon, né? Pokémon Motor. Aqui o Goraidon. Caralho, tem um Miraidon. Já tomei spoiler do jogo, velho. O Hydrapple. Esse aqui. Não sei essa referência aqui, hein. E acabou. Caralho, nem tem nenhum Pokémon parrudo maneiro, velho. Pra virar, é só o Pedregulho lá mesmo. Quer dizer, o 4 braços mesmo lá. Maneiro de porradaria pra se virar, velho. É isso aí. Bem que esse aqui é maneirinho também, velho. Enfim, muito bom, muito bom. Agora, esse daqui, cara. Obviamente o Rosinha, versão fêmea, né, velho? Porra. Enfim. Maneiro, maneiro, velho. Tu pulou. O que eu pulei? Pulei nada não, velho. Acaba aqui. Ah, as pernas desse Pokémon é incrível. Onde eu pulei isso aí? Ele não tá aqui, não? Eu tenho certeza que eu pulei esse Pokémon. Não tá nem aqui no site, velho. Deixa eu ver no Google. O cara também escreve errado, né? Esse aqui é maneiro mesmo, velho. Esse aqui é legal, hein? Pô, eu acho que eu vou ficar com esse aqui. Esse aqui eu viraria com certeza, cara. Esse aqui é muito foda. Caralho, a versão vermelha e branca dele é maneira, velho. A roxa também é da hora. Ah, essas pernas aqui é legal, velho. A tangona pra esconder o armamento. Muito foda, velho. Esse aqui é o meu Pokémon definitivo. Esse aqui, com certeza. 1,90, altura ideal pro macho alfa. É isso aí, velho. Ah, não vou falar alfa, não, que. Não quero me misturar com aquela gente, não. Enfim, muito bom.